We apologize you guys aren't getting this live, but nonetheless, we have a wonderful session today. Again, Partnership for Children of Guilford County, Healthy Relationships Initiative, and the YWCA coming together to bring you the last in our series, incorporating social emotional learning at home. And again, very timely, as we've been in school for a week now here in North Carolina or in Guilford County. And we are very excited to have with us today Robin Armstrong, Ron Dargan, Amy Gear, and Danita Washington, who will be our panelists. And so I'm going to turn it over to Camilla, and let's get started. I'm excited to hear what we have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Alice, and thank you to our partners for this program today, as well as our panelists, who I will introduce shortly. My name is Camilla Dos Santos, and I'm the program coordinator of the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And today's topic is on social emotional learning, which we'll learn a little bit more about not only what it is, but also how to incorporate it into at-home learning for kids of all ages. So we're really excited to bring this program to you today, and we're looking forward to introducing our panelists. So let's go ahead and do that now. Before we do that, today's agenda, we're going to meet our experts. We're also going to learn a little bit about what social emotional learning is, why it's a good thing to incorporate into whenever we're teaching children, either at home or in the classroom, and then how you can sort of do this in a pandemic world where learning just looks a lot different than when it has in the past. We will ask some questions from our experts later, and also be posting this recording for you to enjoy afterwards as well and share with those who might be interested. So that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide so we can introduce our panelists. First up, we have Robin Armstrong, and Robin comes to us from the Guilford County Partnership for Children. She's an NC PreK provider specialist. So she's really here to talk about the little ones and how we can incorporate social emotional learning in those early stages of learning and child rearing. And then next, we've got Ron Dargan, and he's a high school counselor in Guilford County Schools. And actually, I noticed a mistake on those slides because he's Ron Dargan the second and not the third. So I apologize for adding on another generation there, Ron. But Ron's experience is primarily in high school counseling. And a fun fact, I've worked with Ron in the past, and he was a great mentor to me when I started in school counseling as well. So thanks for being here, Ron. We're excited for your perspective on teens. We also have Amy Gear, who's a school psychologist with Guilford County Schools. And while she works primarily with the early learning department, we're going to rely on Amy for her sort of insights for both elementary and maybe some middle school age students as well. And then finally, we've got Danita Washington, who is an early childhood specialist with a program bringing out the best at UNC Greensboro. And her expertise comes in sort of the little ones as well. So we'll be curious to hear from Danita on how we can incorporate social emotional learning for little ones ages 0 to 5. So thank you so much to our experts for being here with us today. I know we've got a lot to talk about. So let's get right into our next slide and talk a little bit about what social emotional learning is, because unless we can really understand what it is and what sort of outcomes we're hoping for when we teach social emotional learning, it's going to be really hard to find a way to actually do it, right? So basically, when we think about social emotional learning, we're really talking about an ability to understand emotions and manage them, an ability to not only set goals, but also achieve them. This ability to show empathy for others, right? So compassion and empathy, as well as to maintain positive relationships of all kinds and make responsible decisions. So when you see this list, these are things that we all want for our children, right? And even ourselves. And we know that as adults, it can be hard to attain these types of competencies. So we know that with children, we've really got to teach them how to do this in order to expect them to be able to manage emotions and relationships later on in life. So when we talk about SEL, or social emotional learning, we're really talking about self-awareness, regulation of emotions, an understanding of how how interactions and communication impact our relationship with others, and an ability to not only navigate those relationships, but make responsible decisions within them as well. So now that we've got a little bit of a sense on what social emotional learning is, let's dive right into the questions. And so our first question on the next slide is for Robin. And so Robin, you work for the Guilford County Partnership for Children, and you're an NC PreK provider specialist, which basically means you spend a lot of time around little ones and the ones that educate them. So from your experience kind of in this role, what are some of the benefits of teaching young children the different aspects of social emotional learning?
Thanks, Camilla, for having me. Social emotional learning, the benefits of it for our pre-K children, as you know, social emotional learning is the foundation for what 4-year-olds, which is the group that I work with for NC PreK, are at the most vulnerable and they're learning. They learn quite a few different skills, and those skills encompass like being confident, and they learn to be friendly. They learn this through play, and they learn it when they are working with their peers in a classroom. They're able to develop good friendship skills and with peers and adults that they feel comfortable with. They're also beginning to be aware of the space around them and others around them, and how to interact and get along with um, children their own age. And they're building that self-confidence that says, I can do it. Preschoolers are, I can do it, just like, the younger group, I can do it myself. I can do this by myself. But most of all, they're learning how to get along with others. And it is the basic foundation for being prepared for school. So in the classrooms, teachers are teaching this, their goals and requirements that require teachers to teach children in pre-K how to move forward in order to get along with others in the community, in their classroom, community, and in pre-K. So we're working towards, teachers do a wonderful job of helping get children prepared for that new walk of their life and moving forward. So a couple of the other things that they do, they learn to listen to instruction. They learn to deal with frustrations, which is a biggie. They learn about themselves, and teachers also learn about individual children and what is needed in order for them to be successful and to be able to regulate their own emotions. So pre-K is a big step, and it is a very rewarding one when we look at, like I said, it's the foundation for life, long learning and work ethics later on in life. So it is a big step, but it's a rewarding step, and children are they're learning a lot from each other.
Thanks so much, Robin. So it sounds like there's a lot of different benefits for teaching young kids social emotional learning, and a lot of them being that it teaches them about just how to be a good friend and sort of how to navigate conflict, but also sort of these internal benefits as well, which is they build confidence and they sort of have the confidence to work through difficult situations, which is what we want to see in young kids, is sort of a mixture of both confidence and resilience, as well as an ability to kind of deal with relationship issues when they come up. And so that sounds like something that I would want not only for my children, but for myself too. So I really appreciate you sharing some of those benefits. And moving on to Ron, because Ron, you're sort of on the other side of the spectrum here, in that you work with high school students, primarily students who are going to graduate from high school and move on to a somewhat adult life. So from your side of things, what are some of the benefits when we teach teens SEL?
Thank you, Camilla, and I appreciate this opportunity. I really I guess I'll start with saying that this is what kind of brought me into not only this profession, but the high school age, because for those who have experienced it at first, working or just been in this environment, it's a different world. And it it's a next step into quote unquote the real world. So the benefits is that things start to transition as far as teaching and working with them with SEL. And again, this is what kind of brought me into this particular grade levels, because I enjoy working with and talking to and meeting with students to prepare them for the next level, which whether it's college, workforce, the military, because they're going to have to transition their mind, their ideas, their plans, and those can be really deep and meaningful conversations. Now, of course, with that age, they know it all, so it can be difficult and challenging at times. But that is where I feel as though I get a lot of the benefits of working with that age. Because again, working with teens, it can be a headache. But I do enjoy those conversations and being able to not necessarily mold them, but see the change as they're going through high school and they're going to take the next step to the real world or to their career as they start that, because things are going to be different once they walk across that stage and they're on their own. And for them to realize that, because again, they're talking about it all through high school. I want to leave home. I want to do this. I want to do that. But when it actually kicks into gear, it's a different thing. It's real life. So I enjoy it, and the benefits that I see, or when they come back, or when you see them in a store, or you see them later on, and they praise you or they thank you, and you see that they're doing well. So that's definitely a great thing.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing you say, Ron, is that, at the high school level, there's a huge focus on academics, but then, when they start to prepare for graduation, it sort of shifts to some conversations about social emotional learning and sort of applying that into real life. Because the reality is that the skills that we learn in social emotional learning carry on to whatever children decide to do next, like you mentioned, whether it's college or workforce or the military, or whatever options come for students after high school. When they've got these skills, when they're able to manage emotions and relationships, it sounds like they can find success in anything they decide to do after high school. So I appreciate that perspective, Ron. Amy, so, your role is a little bit different in that you're a school psychologist in Guilford County Schools. So you're not necessarily spending a ton of time in the classroom, but can you talk to us a little bit about, in your experience, how SEL can benefit children of different ages?
Sure. Thanks, Camille. I'm excited to be here. As a psychologist, we often like to think about the whole child and all that goes into that. And so when depending on which theorist you follow or look into, that obviously includes a child's physical health and their physical well-being, also their academic and cognitive well-being. But then there's these other pieces between the mental health and even social emotional development that we may not be able to see as easily with our eyes, or they may not be as easily assessed on a test, but are just as critical, and in my opinion, sometimes even more critical. And I think that if we don't teach and instruct and pay attention to those social emotional pieces, we are missing out on a big way that we can impact students. In terms of the benefits and what we see in the schools when we do teach these skills, behavior, negative behavior goes down and positive behavior goes up. An increased ability for children to manage their stress and their depression and just other feelings that they're having, and then ultimately just better attitudes about themselves, others, and school. And so I feel like those are all things that we want for our students and we want for our children, in both in our homes and in our schools. And so I feel like the benefits, it's hard to just say it in one sentence because, in my opinion, they're extreme. And that if we can pay attention and teach and be intentional about our social emotional how we support them, then we're just going to see lots of benefits both at school and at home.
Thanks for that, Amy. And it makes a lot of sense, right? That we would want our children to sort of understand the relationship components of life and emotion regulation components of life, because at the end of the day, conflict and problems don't go away when you're done with school. And in fact, they just look different and we manage them differently. But when we sort of have this foundation of being able to not only cope and deal with our emotions, but to not let that negatively impact our relationship with others, when we're able to do that, we can find success in a lot of different ways, which is ultimately what we want for our kids. So I appreciate you sharing some of those benefits associated with SEL. And that sort of leads us into our next question, which is, we have this understanding of what it is. We know it's important. We know there are benefits for kids. So how do we do it, right? How do we actually incorporate SEL into remote learning, which is already stressful enough for parents in a pandemic? And so, Danita, your work ties in a lot of both classroom and home concepts to support basically everyone who works with children, right? So whether it's parents or educators and providers. So can you talk to us a little bit about how parents might incorporate SEL into their remote curriculum for, say, children under the age of 4?
Sure, and thanks again for having me. So a few things that parents can do to incorporate social emotional learning in remote learning from children like birth through kindergarten, but right now I'm going to focus on ages like 4 and 5-year-olds, especially with the virtual learning right now and some of the NC PreK and kindergarten classrooms being virtual. Engaging in creative activities at home together as a group is really crucial. And some examples of that is creating actions like that include cooking together or doing puzzles together, coloring or doing art projects, doing board games, things like that, moving together and dancing together so they can learn the empathy and actions of others while they're interacting during the game, and understanding the emotions of others if they may not do a move right, or if they may learn the dance move wrong and not understand the confidence of that. We're teaching them how to understand each other's emotions, how to interact together, so that way they're not lacking those things that they would get in a classroom setting, in the music and movement setting in school, or when they're at circle time as a group in the classroom. They can still get some of those pieces at home. Even at home, you can also do things like acts of kindness or acts of service for your neighbors or your family members in a safe manner in the neighborhood, whether it be if you have some older family members or neighbors nearby in the community, just stopping by, helping to pull their trash cans to the curb for them, or helping them around the neighborhood with something in a safe manner to teach them empathy. And so helping one of their little friends outside as well, and talking about empathy. And being intentional during COVID and prior to COVID, especially if you have a child that is an only child. Oftentimes, the benefit of having siblings, they can learn some of those social emotional pieces through their siblings. But when you have a child that is an only child, you really have to be intentional as a parent to ensure that you are planning play dates or planning to take them to places or events that give them the opportunity to socialize or learn how to speak to one another, or learn how to take turns and learn how to share and help others do things. So you really have to be intentional in parenting overall. But right now, especially with COVID, it's very, very important, even though everyone is at home, to make sure you are intentional as a parent and not mistaking your physical presence as being a present parent. And what I mean by that is, yes, we're home more, so we're physically present at home with our children, but that does not mean that your presence is truly understood, because oftentimes our work demand is increased, so parents can be so honed into what they're doing on the computer that they're mistaking them being physically there versus being physically interactive with their children. And sometimes you have to be intentional when you're connecting with your children when you're working from home. So that may mean as a parent, you have to set daily times for playing together, like a designated time of playing with your child, reading books with your child, singing songs with your child, making sure that you're emotionally available to your child and not so consumed into the stresses of work. Because oftentimes you can be so stressed out with an email that could come in or an assignment that you have to get done by a certain deadline, you walk away from the computer, those stresses are still on you and you can accidentally take those out on your children. And that affects them emotionally as well. So as parents, we have to be cognizant of that right now during this pandemic and making sure that we don't put that onto our children. And a few other things that you can help your child with is expressing and naming emotions. That's another technique that you can do at home. There's a couple books that you can read with them about emotions and feelings daily and showing them pictures and emotions that help young children understand what it is that they're feeling. Because oftentimes children struggle with identifying how they feel at all. You can ask them to express it, but they may not know the word. So we have to teach them verbally how to express it. You can do that through facial expressions, through drawings, through movement in their body. There's a couple books called The Way I Feel. There is The Invisible Boy. There's another book called Jabari Jumps. And you can also Google it. If you just go to Google and type in social emotional children's books, there are a ton of them that come up. But The Way I Feel is a very, very good book for children birth to 5 years old that really teaches them emotions and how to understand them. But just remembering while you're at home to practice social and emotional learning daily, I just really suggest that you do that through reading, conversation, respecting each other, setting aside that designated time, and even doing some of the small things like brushing your teeth on a daily basis and developing that good habit. That is an example of how you have to do something consistently to get that good habit. We have to provide children with daily opportunities and the consistent opportunities to identify, express, manage, and talk about their emotions to develop that good habit.
Thank you so much, Danita. You said so much there. And really what stood out to me about what you were saying is sort of this idea that you have to be intentional about incorporating social emotional learning into your home. And that sort of the degree of how intentional you need to be really depends on what remote learning looks like for you in your home. So whether there are other siblings, whether you're working from home and need to sort of manage your schedule to incorporate that time. And then what also stood out to me about your suggestions is that social emotional learning doesn't have to happen in this traditional context of sitting at a desk and reading and writing, right? I heard you provide so many different opportunities to incorporate SEL in different ways and interactive ways through playing games and having conversations. So that's a really important point for parents to keep in mind, which is in a world where you're already teaching your children a large part of their curriculum and already sort of having to do that at home, to try to make SEL fun and sort of outside of this traditional, we're going to sit at a desk and write and talk, right? So I love how you gave some examples about how to do it and make it fun so it's not a drag for everyone, right? So I really appreciate some of those examples you gave and some of the resources you gave as well. Thank you so much for that. And so let's move on to Amy, because Amy sort of has sort of that experience of elementary school, and maybe she can even talk a little bit about how to sort of incorporate SEL for, say, elementary school through preteens, for example. So what do you think, Amy? What are some ways that parents can do this at home?
Sure. Well, one of the things I think is so important that we often forget as a parent, I know I do, is that we need to be modeling positive social emotional skills ourselves as adults. Oftentimes, we might get frustrated and we might show behavior that is not something that we would want to model for them. So I think a lot of what practical ways we can support our kids at home is looking at ourselves and being cognizant of how we're modeling those social emotional skills to our students in our daily lives. Everything from when I'm in the kitchen cooking to helping them with their schoolwork, or playing a game with them, that I am, like Danita said, engaged, but also teaching through the play that I'm doing and the conversations that I'm having with my students. and my children. I think it's also important during this time of remote learning for kindergarten through middle school kids that knowing that they have a lot on their plates academically, they have lessons to click on and to complete throughout the day. They have specials to try and get in, and they are going to need breaks, brain breaks, periods of time to walk away from the computer. And I would really encourage families to use those breaks as opportunities to incorporate some of the social emotional learning pieces. So when you walk away from the computer and you're with your child, if there are ways to play a board game and practice turn taking. Turn taking itself is a social emotional skill that young children have to learn. Or at the dinner table, having some conversation starters. So I was joking with a friend this morning that telltale question we ask our kids, how was your day? And they say, fine. That does not open the door for any sort of conversation, but it could take a simple rephrasing of, let's go around the dinner table and share one great thing from today and one not so great thing from the day. And you as the parent share first to model that for your children, how you might do that. We do that at our dinner table. We call it high-low. So everybody tells a high and a low from the day. And I love it when my 7-year-old daughter says, well, I'm going to share 2 highs and 1 low. They want to talk about it. They sometimes just don't know how to talk about it. So providing just those little tweaks in how we ask our questions. There's also other great conversation starters. You can just Google it and get some question stems and, have them on little sheets of paper at the dinner table to try. Like Danita referenced, the books that we read with our children or have available to our children can be very intentional, and the topics can be related to social emotional. And then I'll mention this again in a minute, but I just wanted our audience to know that Guilford County Schools has a whole social emotional learning department. We have it's not the counseling department. It is its own social emotional learning department with director and staff who are helping our teachers know how to teach social emotional learning. And their website has got some great resources for families. I'm actually looking at it right now, and they have buttons on their website targeted towards pre-K, elementary, middle, and high. So families can log on to the Guilford County Schools webpage, go to the departments page for social emotional learning. And then on the left-hand side, it's called Social Emotional Learning Resources for Families. So the thing like the conversation starters is an example of one of the activities that you would find on this page. And there are so many more, and they're targeted based on the age of the child. Okay, I think that was all I was going to share on this question.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And again, I'm hearing this reoccurring theme of intention, right? Just being aware of those moments that are natural teaching opportunities, whether it's when our children are watching what we're doing, that's an opportunity to teach as well. So I really appreciate you sharing those resources, and specifically the Guilford County Schools resources. And I think for families that are not in Guilford County, we encourage you to look into similar resources within your own school district, because it's safe to say that social emotional learning is becoming more and more a part of academic curriculums in schools. And so I would venture to say that if you are not in Guilford County, there's probably a comparable resource for your school district as well. But if you are in Guilford County, it sounds like a wonderful resource to check out. And thank you so much, Amy, for sharing that. And so moving on to sort of Ron, because I imagine it's probably impossible to fit anything extra in a high schooler schedule. And we even heard Amy mention how busy elementary and middle school students are right now as well. And so when, kids are busy and adults are busy as well, how can parents find sort of natural ways to incorporate SEL without sort of having to go through, say, a prescribed lesson with their team?
Yeah, Camilla, as you mentioned, it is a busy time for a teen, parents as well, because they're well into their career, jobs, and everything like that. But given that, especially now that we're in COVID, everybody's kind of quarantining and locked up in a house, is a perfect opportunity to utilize SEL. There's not a lot of downtime, but you're around each other more often. You're forced to. So take advantage of the time, get more involved. And as the previous speakers mentioned earlier, you have to be intentional. So it's not going to happen by itself. This is a great opportunity, not only for you to, I guess, address this with your child, your teenager, but this can help you as a parent as well. It can help out the family as in to get closer or to become one all together at the same time. So it's not just you focusing on your child alone. It's also helps you out as well. The more you talk, the more you interact. As I think her name is Danita said earlier, just doing activities, whether it's cooking, whether it's playing games, it's a whole bunch of things. And during that time, you could be having these conversations. So it's not like a prescribed lesson. So just again, being involved, being intentional, and again, you're still at the point of the child's life where you're still trying to mold them into, I mean, a great citizen, an adult, young adult. So you want to make sure that you take advantage of these opportunities as much as you can.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think one thing that you sort of said that could also be a benefit that we haven't touched on is that sort of social emotional learning can benefit the entire family, whether it brings them closer through conversations like you mentioned, or whether it just means that you're more open to sharing emotions and negative sort of feelings about situations with one another. So aside from the benefits for children, there's benefits for the family unit as well. And it sounds like, you know, from your perspective, when we're talking about teens, it's really about finding the opportunities to have discussions as much as possible, and having that feel as natural as possible if you can. So I appreciate you sort of sharing that. And that sort of leads us into this next portion of our program where we really want to get into sharing some resources for families. And during this portion, each expert's going to have a chance to kind of share some resources that are specific to the work that they do. So we're going to start with Danita. And maybe Danita can share a little bit about what Bringing Out the Best might have in terms of resources and any other resources that you might use in your work to teach SEL.
Absolutely. So with Bringing Out the Best is an early intervention program that provides family-centered, community-based services targeting children from birth to 5 with social and emotional challenges. So our goal is really to increase the number of children in the Guilford County area that are healthy and ready to succeed as they enter into school. Because I'm sure oftentimes children enter into school, and some of my other panelists here are counselors that work in school, and they are really struggling socially, emotionally, having some behavioral difficulties and adjusting. So we try to put in those interventions ahead of time to get them ready to transition into the school setting. Parenting and teaching young children is always stressful, but especially during this period of heightened emotion and anxiety, it can really feel impossible at times. So currently, Bringing Out the Best, we're offering free virtual consultations. We always offer free services throughout the county, and typically it is in person and one-on-one, where we can come to the home or we can go to the school. But we are offering free virtual consultations to address those social, emotional, behavioral questions and concerns, or even assist with the families on ways to help increase those positive interactions and behaviors at home. So if you are a parent or a caregiver or a teacher even, or a director of a center of children from birth age up to 5 years old within Guilford County, at Bringing Out the Best, you can contact us or go to our website, and we can even give you brief consultations, or we can help with you long term. Whatever your needs are, we can work with you. So you can head over to bringingoutthebest.uncg.edu to request services and to also review helpful information and materials. And then other services that I want to highlight that we are under, that are within UNCG under the center, is the Healthy Relationships Initiative. And Bringing Out the Best and the Healthy Relationships Initiative has recently partnered with creating ebooks on the topic that we're speaking on today, as well as many other topics that could help parents and caregivers, whether it's social emotional learning, parenting, healthy sibling relationships, and more. And their website is healthyrelationshipsinitiative.org, where you can view and read these ebooks over and over again as much as you need to really take those tools to help you within the home.
Thank you so much, Danita. I appreciate that you shared sort of a more intensive resource for families that might need some additional consultation, whether it's short or long term. And you can find that on the Bringing Out the Best website. And then I also appreciate you sharing the ebooks, which it's always nice to have a resource that you can tap into when you need it, right? So it's not something that you need to schedule a meeting or have somebody on the other end. So between these two resources, it sounds like families have got a lot to sort of begin SEL at home, whether they need a little bit of one-on-one, a little bit more attention in order to get it going, or whether they just need maybe some insights and tips through our ebooks. So I appreciate you sharing that, Danita. And so, Amy, you've shared a great resource with GCS already, but maybe you can talk a little bit about some other resources that are out there for families, both within Guilford County Schools and outside of the organization as well.
Sure. Well, the good news is the websites are public. So even if you're not in Guilford County Schools, you can definitely access that resource that I mentioned by going to the Guilford County Schools website, navigating to the SEL page, and then looking for that link. I have a few others written down that I want to share, and some are specific towards the younger students, but I'll try and mention some other ones as well. One of my favorite websites for younger students that has some great resources is called the National Center. I'm just going to say it's challengingbehavior.org. It's the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations, which is a really long title, but challengingbehavior.org has some amazing resources. And I just want to read out a couple that I found that may pique someone's interest and go to this website. They have a whole suggestions around using a calm down area at home. A lot of our preschool classrooms and sometimes kindergarten classrooms have calm down areas, a place for a child to go when they feel themselves escalating in their behavior. And so there's a whole piece on how might we create that space at home and teach our children to use it. They have something called the Solution Kit Home Edition. So when a child comes across a problem, it's a specific way that they suggest helping their child find a solution to that problem, whether it's asking for help or taking some deep breaths and those types of things. They've got some great pictures of faces that are feelings and how they're expressed on our faces. So helping children to identify what does our face look like when we're mad or upset or scared or sad. They even have one called Helping Children Understand Emotions When Wearing Masks. So they've really just got some amazing resources. Again, that's Challenging Behavior is the website, but it's the National Center on Pyramid Model Innovations. And for families, the best place to click for, I know when you get to a website, it's sometimes hard to know where do I go, but under implementation, they have a family engagement section, and that's really targeted towards families. Also, I wanted to mention if one of the audience members has a child inside of a elementary school NC PreK class inside Guilford County, we do have a curriculum we're using called Second Step. And so their teachers will be sharing lessons using the Second Step curriculum. You'll see little puppets. You'll hear questions that are all around social emotional. So the whole curriculum is focused on that. And so I just encourage families to engage their students in those lessons, but also take it a step further with the parent resources that their teacher will be providing. There's weekly kind of home connect letters of ways that families can extend upon the lessons that are taught throughout the weeks. Another resource that's upcoming for families is, again, through our SEL department at Guilford County Schools. Actually, it's going to be through the Guilford Parent Academy through Guilford County Schools. It's going to be a 5-part webinar series all around social emotional. It's projected to start in late September, and the Guilford Parent Academy will be advertising that to our GCS families. Two more I want to mention. The There's a website called Castle. It's CASEL. They also have some webinar series, weekly webinars on SEL, and those would span lots of ages, not just the younger kids. So that is the Castle organization. They offer free weekly webinar series every Friday on a variety of topics, all around SEL. And then finally, I wanted to mention, again, this would span all the grades, but specific to Guilford County schools. There are some lessons that are being pushed out through our students' Canvas pages, which is how they are engaging in remote learning right now. There were 2 SEL lessons last week. I think there are 2 more this week and already more posted for next week. So I logged in to see where they were housed on my child's site. I found them under the guidance counselors specials Canvas page, but I think again it probably varies from school to school where those SEL lessons have been posted, but they are great resources as well. And then the last thing that I want to mention and then turn it over to Camilla or someone on your team to talk about is the Sesame Street and Communities partnership we have. Sesame Street and Communities is an amazing resource. Their website is phenomenal. Again, this would be targeted more towards families with younger students, but I will let maybe somebody from your team talk about that a little bit more.
Thank you so much, Amy. You gave us such a great list of resources. And I think what the message is that I want to give to parents after you sort of gave all those resources is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? There is a lot of information out there, either through Guilford County schools or just through other resources that families can access. And so it doesn't have to be something that you need to feel like you have to start from scratch in order to start it in your own home. And just to kind of touch on Sesame Street and Communities, I really appreciate you mentioning that as well. Through the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we are one of several organizations, including the Guilford County Partnership for Children, that basically has access to Sesame Street and Communities resources and information for the entire Guilford County community. So for those of you who are not familiar with SSIC, they've got a number of resources to basically help young kids tackle tough problems. So whether it's emotions or whether it's situations that happen in life like the pandemic or like community violence and racial injustices and things that we're seeing in the news today, it basically just gives parents resources to talk through those situations with kids and to help kids cope. And so there's a lot of good information through that website as well, which is ssic.org. But I appreciate that list, Amy. And I think one thing that also stood out from your list is that there's a lot of resources for all ages within sort of the resources, the list that you gave us. And I would imagine that a lot can be adapted for different ages as well. So just this whole idea that you don't have to start fresh as a parent in order to kind of teach this at home. And so moving on to Robin. Robin, I know you've got access to a lot of different resources as well. And so what are some of the sort of top resources that you might suggest for families with very young children?
Okay, thank you for that question. As I was going through and trying to find not only resources for NC PreK, one of the resources that I did come across, which is from birth through 12. Once you go in, you just click on whichever age group you're interested in. It's through UNC TV. They had so many different resources on. They have this one thing where they talk about social emotional learning for young children called Daniel Tiger Neighborhood, and it's almost like the back in the day Mr. Rogers presentation of, and Daniel Tiger talks about a lot of different emotions and how to get along with others. And like I said, but all you have to do is go in and click on whichever age group. It's from 0 to 12. And so they talk about different activities and things that you would do with that age group in particular. And that is UNC TV. Also for NC PreK, as you know, we do have a prescribed curriculum, and that curriculum is creative curriculum. And so many of the teachers, whether they're working virtually or whether they're in person, or whether they're doing a combination of both, the Division of Child Development, which is the governing authority for in all child care centers in like our county. They license programs. They have provided our NC PreK teachers with teaching strategies, distant learning resources for teachers and families. As a teacher, it will be, as she's working virtually with individual children who are doing, say, remote, they have 24/7 access to the curriculum and resources. They have provided a remote access and a digital platform. Everything is developmentally appropriate. Assessment resources are available. They're doing they have face-to-face resources for families, and they also have two-way communication through a mobile app, just in case parents are having problems logging on to or having access to technology, so they could do it through their mobile phone if necessary. One last website that I want to give to you is our website. The Gifford County Partnership for Children has a website with many free, there's a lot of resources out there, but there are not a lot of free resources out there. So I wanted to make sure that those parents, whether you don't have to be NC PreK, you can just go to the Gifford County Partnership .org website and log on, and there are many resources on there that are free for families of younger children to be able to tap into, that looks at social emotional. It's like kinder music for dancing, Gifford Child development. They have all different types of resources there for families, whether they're from birth to older children. And so I just want to make sure that people are aware that there are resources out there, and they're not always just NC PreK centered. There are resources out there for younger children also to engage in.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate that you shared resources for all ages, but as well for families that are in NC PreK or not. And I think it's important to say that a lot of the resources shared here today can be accessed whether or not you're a Guilford County family. Maybe not all of them, but a large amount of them. So I appreciate you sharing sort of a little bit of those that are free, as well as some of those that are NC PreK as well, specific as well. And so that leaves Ron. So Ron, it's probably a little bit different in your world, but talk to us about some of those resources for social emotional learning for teens and what's out there for parents.
Yes, and actually I have to say that Amy actually took mine. Of course, I work in GCS, so I stayed in my backyard, and I was familiar with the emotional learning department. So I was going to utilize them as the resource that I'm familiar with, and was going to speak on that. Don't want to talk too much about it because she elaborated about the program or about the department or whatever. But in what I know of the program, and of course looking into it, there were like a list of activities that hit home, because it's stuff that I either already do or that I thought was a good idea for parents to utilize. And one of those was an activity where you would ask your child to write down insecurities or just negative thoughts or whatnot, and have your child rip it up at the end and basically throw it away. So it kind of gives them a feel of either overcoming it, of I guess having that power over that. So I think that'd be a great activity for them to utilize. And another one was having quote of the day. I am huge on quotes, so huge that my fraternity, we actually have a group me, and for I think it's been going on a whole year and a half, I've been sending daily quotes to them. And they actually, of course, they hit me up later on or often saying how they look forward to it, or they have comments about it or whatnot. But yes, I'm big, actually right here at my desk for a gift. My wife actually purchased and gave me a counter quote of the day. So I rip it out every day because, again, I'm big on quotes. So again, that's something that they can easily discuss, or, you utilize throughout that day, elaborate on it, and just talk it over. But yeah, again, I'm big on quotes. And I want to say one other activity was, let me think. Simply just listening. So kids, doesn't matter what age, even adults, they always want somebody to listen to. not just hear them out or just not pay attention to them, but listen and engage in what they're talking about or what they're interested in. So those are 3 activities that kind of like got my attention with that program.
Yeah, I appreciate you sort of breaking down that program even more. It's always funny when you have people that work in the same systems and they give the same resources, but that's a good thing because that shows that you're all communicating and you know what's out there for your students and families. But I appreciate that you sort of shared some specific activities that parents can do with teens to kind of incorporate SEL. And really what I'm hearing from you, Ron, is that conversation is key for having these sort of moments of SEL. And then also as a parent to make sure that you're listening in those conversations, right? And that you're listening to understand and not necessarily to respond, which is a skill that sometimes we as adults even struggle with. So I appreciate you giving some concrete activities that parents can use as well. And that sort of takes us to the last piece of our program today, which is just sort of one takeaway point that each of you would like for parents to remember. And so, Robin, we'll start with you. What's one thing that you want all families to sort of take away from today's program?
Okay. All right. The one thing that I do have that I think is so important for parents to remember, to just remember that whenever things become overwhelming, just to stop, take a deep breath, look and listen with your eyes, your ears, and most of all, your heart, and then talk. Because communication is the key, whether it's with a small child or with an older young adult. Communication is the key for life. Thank you.
Thank you. Wise words, I think, for pretty much any part of life, right? To just, when things get overwhelming, to just sort of stop and take a breath, recenter, and talk, right? Talk openly and transparently with the people that we love. So I really appreciate that takeaway. I think that's a good takeaway for this pandemic, not necessarily just this program today. Danita, what is your takeaway point that you'd like everyone to sort of remember after today?
My takeaway, well, prior to that, I do want to, it's a takeaway because they can't take this away from it, but it also is a resource as well, which you guys just finished. And it came through while the other presenters were talking. It's a nonprofit organization that helps parents as well with this topic and many other things. And they send you weekly reminders of things. And that resource is called Parents Together. I'm not sure if any of you have heard it, but they are on Facebook. Their website is parents-together.org. And then they also have a Facebook page as well. But they are a nonprofit organization that helps families in need that talks on topics on social emotional learning, which is what we're talking about, as well as other things. They give tips and strategies, ideas. They'll even send messages through your Facebook Messenger just to tap in and just say, hey, we're just checking to see how you're doing as a parent. Asking if you want daily questions to make sure that parents are staying engaged and connected with their kids. So it's a really helpful and useful tool that people can use. So that's a good takeaway for those watching as well that will watch this. But one of my things that I felt is a good takeaway from, all of the wonderful things that we talked about today is being intentional, being self-aware, and then putting down the phone or turning off the TV and really connecting with the children. So that way you connect on a social, emotional level and communicate, be in tune. As she said, take a deep breath, look, listen. It's difficult to do sometimes when you have the phone in your hand or when you're looking at a television. You really get the time to really remove all of that, connect with your kids, connect with your family, and without the distraction. And in order to cultivate that, you really have to make sure, like I said, that you're intentional and just to remember to stay calm and to be realistic because oftentimes kids can sense when adults are worried or when they're anxious or adult emotions directly affect their children. So we have to make sure that as adults, we take time to take care of ourselves so that we can be our best selves for our children.
Great points, Danita. I just heard you say so many great things between being intentional, putting away our devices, really connecting with our kids and our loved ones, and thinking through what that looks like, right? So not just sort of expecting that those connections will happen, but making sure that we're making them happen. So I appreciate you sort of sharing the importance of intentionality during this time, which sort of really ties into Robin's point. So we're sort of kind of having these takeaway points that go together, which tells us that these are these are sort of the foundational parts of social emotional learning. If you don't have this piece, it's going to be hard to actually make it work in your family. So let's hear from the rest of our experts. Ron, talk to us about your takeaway point. What do you want families to know?
What I want them to take away from all this is the key word relationship, and what all comes with a relationship is the key thing is communication, listening to one another, spending time together, being close. So the key word, like I said, is relationship. You want to build a strong relationship, and I think that's going to, I guess, it's going to, improve other areas if you just focus on relationship building and what can you do to improve the relationship, because that's going to be key on whatever or however the student or a child takes the discussion, what you say or whatever. If you have a good relationship, then I think it's always going to end up on a good note, because if not, you're going to talk about it. So again, that's key point in a relationship. So yeah, just focus on a positive relationship.
Well, and as program coordinator of the Healthy Relationships Initiative, where our entire mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds, I second that. So I definitely agree, and think that when we're talking about SEL with families of all ages, with children of all ages, the core piece of that is making sure you have a healthy relationship in place with your kids, right? And to work on that and strengthen that relationship. So thank you so much for that, Ron. Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you wish parents would take away from this program today?
Well, I think Danita might have stole mine. I was going to say how important the adult piece is, and that I truly think that all social emotional starts with us as the adults, and that it would be very difficult to incorporate and teach without being in a healthy place ourselves. To remember that our children are always watching, that our children model and mimic what they see. Regardless of how old they are. I believe that's true. And so as we think about, we've given families a lot during this past hour, and sometimes that it's in itself can be overwhelming, websites to go to and activities to click on. So if anyone is feeling overwhelmed by that, I would just ask that they take a step back and really think about their own social and emotional well-being and some that they might be able to take for themselves first before they launch into ways to help their children. I think that taking that step is valuable and necessary and can end up having a bigger impact on children that you're around, sometimes even more so than clicking on a link or getting to an activity.
I appreciate you sharing that, and also for saying that, we did give a lot of information today, and sometimes with that does come this feeling of just where do I begin? And so I think, your point, Amy, to just begin with sort of modeling and being aware that you're always being watched, right? Because you're right, and that children do sort of pick up on everything we do, even if we're not aware that they are. So I really appreciate you sort of bringing up that point. And that ties in really nicely to sort of the end of our program today. We've spent about an hour kind of talking about all these different ways to incorporate social emotional learning at home. And our hope is that from all of the different strategies and resources that were shared here today, that you can pick a couple of things that work for you and your family. And so I just wanted to take this time to thank our partners, the YWCA High Point, Guilford County Partnership for Children, Guilford County Schools, just for bringing this program together, bringing out the best. We're really grateful for not only your time, but your expertise here today. And we know that today's program will be helpful for families, not only today that stuck with us today, but also in the future. So thank you everyone for your time. And I'm going to now hand it over to Alice.
I'm on. All right. Thank you guys so much. This was fabulous information. I enjoyed listening to it. Even though I don't have a child in school, I found it very helpful because we do work with children here at the YWCA and for a lot of my friends so that I can direct them to this wonderful session. Thank you guys so much, all to our panelists, our experts who are here with us, for Camilla and Lamisha, and Christine for being partners with us. This was a great series, and we look forward to more in the future. And again, just thank everyone. Thank everyone for tuning in. And you guys have a great Monday, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.